Hi, Novel Reader 16. So, I'm sort of on a classical book, kind of Jane Austen-y theme right now. So I thought I might as well do like the most well-known girly book of all time, which is Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. And I think it's interesting to note that Charlotte Bronte, who wrote the last book I reviewed, Jane Eyre, didn't like Pride and Prejudice, and I'll tell you why in a minute. Anyway, well actually she just didn't like Jane Austen, but anyway. This book takes place, well I don't know exactly when it takes place, but it was written in, I believe, 1813. And this was during the time of like the whole War of 1812, so the bitterness between England and the United States was still going on, and there was a lot of warfare and stuff going around at that point in time. But Jane Austen mentions almost none of it in her novels, except to mention that the officers stayed in the town sometimes and went to parties, officers meaning soldiers. But other than that, there really isn't a lot of mention of the war going on around them in the books, which is significant. But it's also the reason that these books are still popular 200 years from the day they were written. And it's probably because girls understand it. The whole story of this book is this family, the Bennets, have 5 daughters, and the mother is trying to get them all married to wealthy, good men before they're too old to get married, which I don't know the exact age of it is, but Elizabeth's friend, Elizabeth is one of the main characters, she's a Bennet sister. Her friend Charlotte got married at 27, and that was considered old. So, the main portion of the story focuses on Elizabeth herself and her older sister Jane, who they're best friends. They talk about everything. They're really close. They're like this. And Jane really likes this guy named Mr. Bingley, who's kind of, people are always bashing on Bingley, but there's nothing really wrong with him. He's a sweet, nice guy, and just a little bit unsure of himself. He's not really self-confident, but Jane still likes him, and Jane is the most beautiful of the Bennet sisters. She's the oldest. And Elizabeth doesn't understand why Jane can't just admit it, that she likes him. And there's this whole thing because Mr. Bingley is so dependent on his best friend, Mr. Darcy, who Elizabeth hates his guts. And it seems like Darcy doesn't like her either, but he actually really likes her. Like, he loves her, basically. He falls in love with her. And there's this whole misunderstanding between Mr. Darcy and herself. And there's this whole big thing that people sometimes claim the title, Pride and Prejudice, is referring to Elizabeth and Darcy. And it is, but not in the way they think. Because most people say, oh, well, this one must be Pride and this one must be Prejudice. But the truth is, both of them are proud and both of them are prejudiced. Although, if I had to just pick one, I would do like one for each. I would do the opposite of what most people say, which they say Lizzie is proud and Mr. Darcy is prejudiced. I think it's the opposite. I think Mr. Darcy is proud and Elizabeth is prejudiced. But they're both of them, really. For different reasons, and if you've read the book you know why, and if you haven't, because Elizabeth is prejudiced against Mr. Darcy from her first impression. She takes the first impression, she decides that is how he is, and she doesn't feel like that needs to change at any point as she enjoys his company, I'll say, like, gets to know him more. She still doesn't change her opinion of him until she's forced to. And she's proud. I don't know. She prided herself on her ability to take in people's characters. So she's not humble enough to admit that she could have been wrong. And Mr. Darcy is proud because of his wealth. He's very wealthy, and his position, and his opinion of himself, and he's prejudiced against the Bennets because of they are poor and their family connections are not the best. And that's not really fair, you know, not really fair to them, because they themselves are pretty awesome people. Well, anyway, there's a lot of different things going on in this book, so I could only briefly discuss what happens. Because there's the main plot, and then there are subplots within it, which I think is the mark of a really good story, because it keeps you interested as long as you're not getting confused during it. And this is the most popular and well-known, well, most read of Jane Austen's novels. And this book itself perfected the way the novel is written in literature, like all around us. All books, the way they are written, the pattern is based off this book, because it perfected the way the novel was written, which before was a little bit sloppy. And so we owe that to Jane Austen. Novels would not be what they are today without her. And the reason Charlotte Bronte didn't like Pride and Prejudice is you can tell just by reading what she writes as opposed to what Jane Austen writes, which is Jane Eyre is a little bit more dramatic, what used to be called a Gothic novel, a more like passionate from the heart, sort of poetic kind of story. And Jane Austen is more from her head. She's more of a she likes to present the irony in life and the way people act and think, and reveals human nature rather than human passion, which is what Charlotte Bronte did. And her objection was that there was no poetry in Jane Austen's writing. But that may be true. I don't necessarily agree, but it could be argued to be true. But you cannot deny that Jane Austen does present a lot of ironic truth in her novels, and that's why so many people find it interesting. She reveals so much about human nature, and it's funny. And I personally love Jane Austen, and knowing her story and everything is very inspiring to me because I love writing. But this is one of my favorite books. And for girls who've like seen the movie or whatever, they heard about it but they haven't read it, they should read it, because they will find it interesting and they will find it funny and entertaining and all that stuff. And I have not seen the 5-hour-long Pride and Prejudice, or however long it is, with Colin Firth, but I do like the one with Keira Knightley. Don't hate me, like super Austen fans, but I do. And as a person that comes from a family who's really into movies, I understand that you can't always fit everything from a book into a movie. So for the time slot that they had, they did a very good job. And I just hope you guys will read the book if you haven't already, or have some comments to say about what my thoughts were. And that's what I have to say.